First, though, let's talk to Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire, member of the European Research Group, of course. Andrew, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
So, I mean, you're probably as fed up with all of this as I am. What is the point of all these negotiations exactly when Boris keeps telling us that there is no chance of a deal, there probably will be no deal, and yet we are duty-bound, apparently, to continue talking about the possibility of having one?
Well, I think it's putting more pressure on the European Union. I mean, if you think back a few weeks, Boris actually called a line under the negotiation and said, look, we can't do a deal. The talks have ended. And it was the European Union that came back. At that time, Boris made it very clear that they've got to come back with concessions. And it would appear that they've pretty much ignored that and carried on.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, so why does he continue to entertain the notion would be my question.
Well, I think I tweeted at the weekend that the negotiations currently are a bit like a load of concerned parties standing around a hospital bed where they know the patient's expired, can't be resuscitated, but no one wants to turn the life support off and take responsibility.
Yeah.
I think while there's a chance of a deal, it's probably anyone who refused it would be seen as irresponsible. But I mean, any sort of a deal we got now, how much parliamentary scrutiny of the detail, and as we know with any deal with the European Union, the devil is always in the detail.
Right.
How are we supposed to study this deal and decide whether we want to vote for it or support it or not?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm told there's something like 600 pages to look at already, isn't there?
Well, I mean, that's not going to be a 5-minute job, is it? And it's not something you want to speed read because we've been caught out on that before. The problem is, Mike, as you know, I mean, we want a trade deal. We joined the European Union because it was a common market and it was all about trade. But for the European Union, it's all about politics. And they see these negotiations as a way, and any treaty coming from it, not as a trade deal. They see it as a way of taking back control of the UK through the back door.
Yes.
And we haven't even left yet. And it's hard to see how the Prime Minister's got any room to give on the level playing field or governance. We can't have the European Court of Justice overseeing any treaty because that's marking your own homework. The EU will always get 100% and we'll get in the naughty corner all the time. And the level playing field, it sounds innocuous enough, but it means basically undermining Brexit. We won't be taking back control of our laws. We'll be under EU law now in the future. And can you imagine if the EU in the future decided to put onerous regulations on financial services, something that doesn't affect them very much, but does affect the UK a great deal, and we wouldn't even be at the table to object to it. So it's very difficult to see how anything gives. I mean, I've been saying for weeks that the fishing issue is a red herring. They'll concede on the fish because they know they haven't got a leg to stand on there legally anywhere in the world. But that is to try and induce us to make concessions on what they really want, which is the level playing field.
Yes.
And we can't do it.
And I mean, a level playing field, I think, should be renamed because it sounds, as you say, quite innocuous to want a level playing field. But that's not.
Well, who wouldn't?
Well, yeah, but that's not what it is it? That's like saying that, you know, the armed robber is a gentleman standing at the door. You know,
it's a wealth redistributor. Is a wealth redistributor, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also, as you say, their way of continuing to keep control over what it is that is basically our own internal market. I mean, Guy Verhofstadt today has tweeted out saying, you know, gunboats in the sea, we're supposed to be friends, not enemies. To which I said, well, maybe you should stop telling your friends, telling your friends to stop stealing the fish. You know?
Yes, indeed. So the torment goes on. It is worse than Noel Edmonds' Deal or No Deal, isn't it, really?
I mean, that's a low blow, Andrew, I have to say. I mean, it's not that bad. But listen, here's the thing. Why does old Boris not just... I mean, I was given a theory over the weekend, and I'm beginning to think it might be true, that he's kind of playing them at their own game here, and he's basically trying to make it clear that if there is no deal, which is almost inevitable, that it will be their fault rather than his.
I think there's some of that. There is going to be a blame game afterwards, and you know, he who calls or she who calls the end to the negotiations first is going to get the blame. I think also your listeners need to brought into stark focus was the democratic deficit of the European Union compared to the now independent sovereign UK. So Boris went over to who's elected. and accountable for his actions, went over to see Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president, who's appointed, and she can do whatever she wants. She's not politically accountable. Boris wanted Merkel and Macron to be there as well, because they are actually elected in their own countries, and the EU refused. And that just demonstrates to me that the EU have got a huge democratic deficit, which allows them to do things which are detrimental to the workers and the people of the European Union, with basically no comebacks. Another reason why we're leaving.
Well, exactly right. And as far as the other countries are concerned, I mean, Germany, which we're going to talk about later on in terms of its kind of new rapid lockdown policy, Angela Merkel seems to have lost the plot a little bit lately, doesn't she? I mean, she seems to be sort of flailing about all over the place on all sorts of things.
Well, she lost the plot when she opened Europe's borders unilaterally without consultation with any other country, and allowed millions of migrants to come into the European Union. That was a huge mistake, and I think that was basically what sealed that we'd be leaving some years later the European Union.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. And as far as the party is concerned, I mean, Boris seems to have had with Brexit a relatively good sort of few days in a way, because it's got him away from the whole coronavirus questions, the dealing with that particular problem, which I appreciate hasn't been easy for him, but you know, he hasn't got a lot of support in the country for that. But it seems as though Brexit has kind of in a way slightly rejuvenated him.
Well, he's had a chance to play on the world stage. That's always good for any politician, and ultimately, you know, upsetting foreign governments, when's that ever dented the popularity of a British Prime Minister?
Yes, well, quite right. And what about Macron? Where is he now in all of this? Because he was kind of knocking around last week, making a lot of noise.
He's between a rock and a hard place. I don't envy French politicians, really. I mean, France is becoming an ungovernable country. They fall into and out of love with their politicians very, very quickly. And he's got elections coming up, which he's trailing in the polls. And he played to the crowd, made promises to French fishermen. And I suppose he will say that he stood strong, even if that means ultimately that they get less access than they would have done under a negotiated treaty. I'm quite happy, and I think the government's quite happy, to give access to our waters to EU boats, but we've got to be in charge of it. It's got to be decided each year, and it's got to be on a sliding scale as our own industry expands over the years to take up the opportunity created by Brexit in the fishing industry. And if they won't accept that, I mean, you know, there's nowhere to go. But they could end up in a situation where they have considerably less access to our waters than they might have done. And obviously, Macron's probably going to get the blame either way. But I mean, he's probably toast anyway, to be honest.
Well, exactly right, because if he does lose the fishing battle, which we look as though we're going to win, and I'm with you, I don't expect us to be able to suddenly fish all of our own waters, but we should be charging them a pretty penny for their right to do so. There's a pretty good chance that he will lose quite a lot of those North Normandy constituencies to some other parties, and which might be actually pro-Frexit parties as well.
Well, I think we're watching Euroscepticism increase across the European Union, and I think, quite honestly, you know, trying to damage the UK through not doing a trade deal with us is a blade that cuts both ways, Mike. So yes, it will hurt us, but we can get over that. It's a short-term disruption. But when the German car worker and the French farmer and the Spaniards and Portuguese who work in the holiday industry, which service UK visitors, realise that the EU negotiators care more about their jobs and the future of the European Union than they do about their citizens' jobs, there's got to be a backlash somewhere along the line. There's got to be some accountability for the actions they're taking. Yes,
I think that's absolutely right. Moving back to domestic matters, Andrew, how are things? I know you're in North Leicestershire, so you always say you're not quite in
Northwest.
Northwest. Well, let's not get too specific. Maybe
Northwest. I'll let you into a little secret. We had some more antics. I mean, as you probably know, I voted against the government the other week, because they linked my constituency with Leicester, which has been in lockdown all the way through. It was the first city into lockdown. I said, while we're linked to Leicester, the chance of us getting out of Tier 3 are somewhere between slim and zero, and slim just left.
Right.
So we caught the one of the Labour deputy mayors again holding a rally for hundreds of people, no social distancing, no face masks, and they posted it actually on social media. It's unbelievable. I sent it to Matt Hancock and said, look, what chance have we got? We're down to 110 cases per 100,000. So we're at the very bottom of tier 2, but we're still stuck in tier 3 in northwest Leicestershire.
Yeah.
And between you and me, as long as you don't tell anybody,
yeah.
Matt Hancock texted me back and said, we're going to de-link you with Leicester.
That's a very good plan. But I mean,
so that sounds good. I was hoping it was going to be permanent, to be honest, Mike.
Well, yeah. I mean, I suppose you can always hope, live in hope. But I mean, there is this mad kind of dash, isn't there? From when we've got Sadiq Khan in London talking about locking up the school gates and telling the kids in Greenwich that they can't go back to school. He seems to have pivoted completely now, 360 degrees. Via 180 degrees, where he wanted to close all the bars and restaurants and keep the schools open. Now he wants to do the opposite.
Yeah, well, Labour have got no policy on Brexit. They've got no policy on COVID. I mean, the fact is that while my constituency is linked with Leicester for the COVID tiers purposes, it doesn't matter what we do, we're never going to get out of tier 3. And I blame the Labour administration in Leicester and the mayor, who's transgressed himself on numerous occasions, have been caught breaking the lockdown, setting a bad example.
Yeah,
I mean, he's put those hospitality businesses in Leicester have never been out of lockdown since last March. He's ruined thousands and thousands of businesses and hundreds of thousands of lives. And while we're linked to him, he's having that detrimental effect on my constituents. And that's not what they voted for. It's not what they support. And I can't allow it to carry on. It's not fair.
No, it really isn't. So are you hopeful that perhaps you might have a bit of good news this week in terms of the tiers then?
I'm hope so. And I think perhaps Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire will be coming out of tier 3 as well, which will be good for them, and that's most of my border. I've got more of a border with Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire than I do with Leicestershire, actually.
Yes, absolutely right. Well, good to talk to you, Andrew. Meanwhile, the deadlines will continue to be busted. The European conversation goes on. Andrew Bridgen talking to us from northwest Leicestershire. Make no mistake, that's exactly where it is, and that's exactly where he is. He doesn't want it to be twinned with any other part of Leicester because, as we say, it's been in lockdown for months on end, and guess what? It's not doing any good. What's the point of it?